should think you want most. And you could kill it off until you bled it. I got rid of that ghost. And certain habits still remain embedded. Hello, hello. And welcome to a P.T. Anderson picture, a P.T. Anderson commentary track. This is my first movie, and it means a lot to me. It kind of became a bastard child for a little while, but it's mine now, and I love it, and there's a lot to say, so I'll start saying it. The reason why the titles are at the beginning is because of a guy named Robert Jones, who's one of the producers of this movie. I had the 4 presentation cards at the beginning, and then the movie started. In other words, Rice Entertainment presents Green Parrot Productions associated with Trinity, P.T. Anderson Picture, boom, and we start. Because I like to do it that way. That's how Boogie Nights is. And what happened was I got, through sort of everyone's contract, the sort of standard movie contract is that your title goes before the picture. Your sort of main title credit goes before the picture. Now, considering that I'm friends with everyone who's on this movie, with the exception of Robert Jones, everyone agreed to waive that right. Except Robert Jones, who had been essentially kicked off the movie by Rice Entertainment. So before that came to light, I had to get his permission, and he said point blank to me, I will not waive my right to have the main title at the beginning, so therefore I am essentially forcing you to put the main titles at the beginning. It kind of works, actually, because I get to set up the mood and everything with the cue, with the Clementine's Loop cue, which is an octagon, which is played by John Bryan and Michael Penn. Now I'm on a nicer topic. This coffee shop scene where these two guys meet, it used to be a sort of notion of mine, I guess it still is that if you don't know what you're writing, just put 2 people in a coffee shop and have them start talking, and it will eventually figure itself out. And that's kind of what happened. This movie just sort of started writing itself. I know that's a kind of cliched thing to say, but just get 2 people talking. And if you don't know what they're saying, but you know one of the guys, he's going to lead everything, and guide you, and the movie will come. And it can take a long fucking time for the movie to come, but eventually you can find it, and that's what happened.
Hey.
What?
You want a cup of coffee? You want a cigarette?
What?
The reason that I wrote this movie, and probably one of the real reasons to talk on a commentary track about this movie, is to talk about Philip Baker Hall. He's my favorite actor in the whole world, and I think, just if I could even step back from it a second, really the great American actor. I really mean that. Talking about where this movie came from is that it came from trying to decipher him, being a fan of him. I had been a fan for a long time, ever since I saw Secret Honor, which is a Robert Altman movie he made in '84. It's a one-man show, and I saw him over the years crop up in TV shows, like guest stints on Cheers and stuff, and they were great, but they were beneath him. It was not where I thought this unfound jewel of actors should be. So I was working as a production assistant on this sort of docudrama thing for PBS. They were recreating campus uprisings or something, and I was working as a PA, and Philip Baker Hall was in it. And this was wow, I'm gonna get to meet my idol, And I walked up to him, and like a fucking jackass I just said I'm gonna make you a star.
We shared some cigarettes and some coffee between takes, and Paul told me that he had seen Secret Honor, and which is always good to hear because not that many people have seen Secret Honor, not in this country anyway. He said that he was doing that he had a short film that he'd written, and that he would send me a copy of it because there was a terrific role in it for me. I have to say I was shocked at the brilliance and the depth of the writing, not because I didn't think he would be capable of it, but only because in a lifetime of looking at scripts, both in the theater and in film and television, I'm prepared for hopefully for good writing, but I wasn't prepared for great writing. That really did throw me for a loop. I call it poetic language. It may not appear that way to everybody, but for actors, this kind of language for us is really very poetic. And anyway, that did blew me away. We hear all the time about what a collaborative process movie making is, and we think when we hear that, we usually think, I think, in terms of 150 crew people and 30 editors and all the musicians and the cast and all the physical elements. But there are other aspects of the collaboration that are less obvious, I think. This is one that is talked about somewhat, but I think it's really key here, and it certainly is key in my working with Paul, and I think the reason that a lot of other good actors like to work with Paul. Trust really is the key word here.
A friend of my dad's saw Cigarettes and Coffee and said, "Wow, that's pretty funny." And I said, "What?" And I said, well, "Your dad." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, that's your dad. That dialogue, you know, in that first scene in Cigarettes and Coffee it's very much like my dad." And I was living with my dad at my time. My dad and I were actually kind of like bachelors, like living together. We got this house together, and it was like when I was writing Sydney, actually, it was like 1992, I think. And every morning we'd get coffee together, and he kind of had his very sort of strict rules about, you know, how conversation could begin. I mean, he wasn't strict in any way, but he was just sort of, yeah, you know what? He came in one morning and he knocked on me, "Let's go down and get some coffee." I said, "Yeah, but you know what? I gotta do this thing." And then he said, "I'm not even gonna talk to you until we get the coffee. Come on, let's go get the fucking coffee, and we'll have a cigarette or two, and then we'll chat. We'll fucking talk about everything." I said, "Yeah, but I gotta go get my car from the thing, and I got so much shit going on." I says, "Listen, get in the fucking car. We'll go get the coffee, and we'll talk, and we'll fucking have some coffee, and we'll have a cigarette. We'll talk this whole fucking thing through. I swear to God. I'll figure getting your car out." You know, I said, "Okay." And I sort of like wrote that, you know, kind of by accident, and so it picked up on it and said, "Wow, you've written your dad." And
Ernie Anderson. Ernie was a legend in the voiceover business. Literally, he was a legend. He was a legendary character, not only because of the excellence of the quality of work he did for so many years, but as a person. He was a very interesting person. He was a unique person, and I met him several times, and I liked him. I liked him a lot.
I think because because my relationship with my dad was pretty strong, you know, pretty fucked up in a lot of cool ways, but generally pretty strong, because he was just a strong presence, you know, just a strong character, and for some reason I've formed I think a few relationships with sort of older, wonderful, talented, wise men. Chief among them probably Philip, you know, but I didn't see it as a theme until I'd made 2 movies back to back.
Well, Coffee and Cigarettes, too.
And certainly with
Cigarettes
and Coffee, you know. So through 3 times out of the gate, there's this kind of father-son relationship happening, and you sort of spot a pattern, and you go, wow, well, there's something to that, and what the hell does that mean? And I think I don't know yet, but hopefully a couple movies down the line, I'll figure it all out. I should say now, without any hint of anger or anything else in my voice, that I will refer to the movie that we're watching as Sydney. And I know that it's called Hard 8, but I call it Sydney, because that's what I called it. And that's what we call it, who made it. And somebody else called it Hard 8. So we'll call it Sydney. So anytime you hear me say Sydney, I'm not just talking about the guy, I'm talking about the movie. So this is a scene in the car with Philip and John. This cut happened by accident, where he comes from the back seat to the front seat. It's a result that some of the elements that I had shot that took John from the back seat to the front seat had been damaged. The negative had actually been cut and damaged. And I had no way to get him from the back to the front. Essentially, I was forced into what I think is actually kind of a cool, creative jump cut, and looks real interesting. And you put a little horn by in there, you know, that sort of sweeps by, and you've got kind of a good rhythm, a good snap cut, you know. And I probably would not have come up with it if not for damaged negative elements. This scene between the two of them is really based on, or really comes out of, Melvin and Howard, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and essentially one of the greatest scripts ever written, I think, because essentially what it did, structurally what that script did, and what I kind of tried to rip off, was get 2 people talking, and if it's engaging enough and wonderful enough, it will free up the rest of the movie for an hour and a half to go off on any tangent you might want to go off on. And that's what Melvin and Howard did. It had Jason Robards and Paul Lamont talking in that car for 20 minutes. Now, 2 people talking for 5 minutes is hard, but 20 minutes was just miraculous the way they did that. And they're driving through the desert outside Vegas. So this is obviously inspired by Melvin and Howard, certainly a ripoff, and hopefully a successful one. And not to mention the Pants on Fire gag, which is another sort of concept, which is really trying to take that bad old story structure concept to a new level, which is you gotta suck them in within the first 5 minutes. Well, I agree with that concept, and hopefully you can just make it so kind of punk rock and weird that it really kind of works in an interesting way. Not that you start with an explosion, that you start with a small little puff of pant fire, you know? That, I think, is kind of interesting. And my friend Scott Frank, actually, who's a great writer, saw this movie, and he said, it was a very long cut, my first cut, and he said, you had me, even though this is the most boring fucking movie ever made right now, you had me because of that Pants on Fire gag, because I was waiting for another Pants on Fire the whole time. I said, well, that's what it should be in an ideal world, is that kind of thing. And I also think it's very interesting to always sort of flash to something that's talked about, like Truffaut did with, you know, may my mother drop dead if my grandmother will drop dead right now if I'm lying. Boom, cut to the mother, you know. And I sort of revisited this or did it again in Boogie Nights with the name and the Dirk Diggler thinking up his name and flash to the neon sign. It's a good little trick, and it's a fun one, and I think a fair one to kind of count on.
The first thing you do is you go in the bathroom, clean yourself up.
When I first read the script, I read the script and I got hooked into the story, but right away my mind is working. How can I know this guy? How can I discover who this guy is? And what can I do to bring this brilliant character on the page to life? Because it was on the page didn't mean that it had any life, nor did it, to begin with, mean that I even understood it. So that was then the beginning of my work after I had read it, was to try and find in my own life and my own life experience, discover who this guy would be for me. I would talk to Paul, and I would lay out my understanding of a given moment or a series of moments or a scene, and see if that's where he was going also. And then this interchange, this chemistry then between the two of us began then to allow this guy you see on the screen to evolve, who is not me at all in any way.
I thought that I would be able to talk. I'm new enough at this that I can't really talk about my process. I've only done it twice, you know what I mean? And I've only done 2 movies, and I'm writing my third. I mean, I've written other things, but I have a different process every time. I know certain things, certain mile markers are certainly the same, you know? But I'm kind of finding out that I don't know my fucking process, that it's always kind of brand new, and each movie has a life of its own, you know? This movie I wrote very, 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 very quickly. I mean, in like 2 weeks. And that's so fast. But it just came vomiting out of me. I mean, it was clear that it had been building up inside of me for a long time. You know what I mean? A lot of the issues. Maybe a lot of guilt had been building up in me that just came vomiting out as a screenplay, you know? Boogie Nights took much longer, you know? I mean, that was so... And now on the thing I'm writing, I've been writing for 7 months. I've never written for 7 months. But wow, it's astronomical. It's huge. It's everything, you know? But in other words, what I'm trying to say is I have no fucking idea what my process is.
By the foreman. You sit at that machine and you play $20. Only 20. So make it last. Play slowly. $1 at a time.
Talking about the scam that happens in the casino is actually pretty interesting. When I originally wrote a draft of the script, I didn't have this in here. I had Philip Baker Hall explaining it to John Riley in the car. He says, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. And I went to the Sundance Lab, which is a place where I met Richard LaGravenese, who's a great, amazing person and a wonderful screenwriter. And I sat down with him, and he said, yeah, there's one thing about your script. He said, why am I reading about things as opposed to seeing them? And he said, is this really true? Can this work? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I do this. You know, I've done it a couple times. I've actually done this scam a couple times many years ago when I was in Vegas and would run out of money. I'd just kind of make sure to pump up the rate card and make sure that it got me either a comped room or a comped meal. Generally, it got me a comped meal more than a room, you know, but I had known guys that had gotten rooms from it. You can't really do it anymore. It's a thing of the past. I mean, they catch on to these things pretty quickly.
Almost.
Get your stuff. Come with me. Give the cashier $100 in tokens.
There is the character, and there is the actor. We're in a zone now about acting that's a little difficult to talk about because my goals as the character, my goals in each scene were very limited and very specific. As the actor, I'm aware of having to try to choreograph this whole symphony, this whole concerto. I know as the actor that I'm going to kill Sam Jackson down the line, and that's going to change all of our lives. But as the character, of course, I don't know where I'm going.
Good luck.
Thank you.
So how much do you have on your rate card now?
Well, I cashed 150 first, and then another 100, so 250.
And you have only spent $20. So you just keep circling the bill, John. Cash to tokens, tokens to cash.
There you are.
Now, slowly spend what's left of the 50. But that's just for show when the floor man comes around.
Right.
Do it for an hour, take a break, do it again for an hour, so on. Be around.
Where?
I'll find you.
It's one of the great things about working on this film, too, because, again, Paul, I think this is true of the really good directors, but there are many directors of whom this is not true. Paul has a really clear vision in his head of what he wants, and he had it long before we got to Reno to shoot this thing. And I don't know when that vision really materialized. Maybe the moment that you tore that last page out of the typewriter. Maybe I don't know for him when it, but it's clear when you're working with Paul on a film that he knows exactly where he wants to go, and he does see this whole thing in his head very clearly, and so that, like, matters of style, for example, matters of style. I don't think we really discussed this. I mean, there was no discussion where Paul sat us down and said, "Now, guys, about style. Here's the style." We never had a talk like this. We never even used the word. I don't think it didn't come up. But we all knew we were on the same page immediately, almost. I mean, surely Riley and I knew we were on the same page as soon as we met and started talking about the script up there at Sundance when we first began to workshop the thing a year and a half before it was shot. And then as soon as Gwyneth came into the project, and I remember when I met Gwyneth in Silver Lake, that little coffee shop over there, and the four of us sat down and talked, and it was clear after 10 minutes we were all on the same page, and so that matters of style did not have to be discussed, really. It was not relevant. We somehow were, the power of the script melded us together style-wise. And then he did the rest of it with the way he shot it and the way he edited it, too.
Let's say I've written this movie so far as John C. Reilly gets to the slot machine and the scam, and he starts to do the scam. And then he performs the scam properly, and he gets a free room. Now, there's a fade-out after that chapter, and it goes to 2 years later. Now, when writing, I could have written myself all the way up to John C. Reilly. Fade out, he's in the room, he's got a hotel room. I probably wrote 3 or 4 different branches off of that. One that was fade up, it's the next day. Fade up, it's 2 weeks later. Fade up, it's 2 years later. Fade up, it's like a flashback. You know what I mean? And I don't even remember what they were, but you're just trusting a sort of tangent that you might follow, because I never have writer's block, and that's not a sort of a brag or anything, because I kind of have the opposite in a way, which is too much shit going on in my brain. So, and believe me, it's just as disastrous, because you can't follow a thread. You know what I mean? It becomes very hard to follow a thread. The challenge becomes not getting a thread. The challenge becomes like, which one do I grab onto? You know? And so I will have written 4 different paths for John C. Reilly and Philip Baker Hall to follow the next day after they get the hotel room. And then it's a matter of sort of deciphering which one is the right one, you know, and which one is the most interesting to me, which one is was the most natural. Was it the first one that came to me, or was it the one that came because of this, that, and the other thing? It's like a fucking Rubik's Cube, and it's very hard to talk about. A, without sounding pretentious, B, without someone sitting next to me and watching me the whole time I read a script. Do you know what I mean?
I have a friend in Los Angeles. Maybe someone who can help.
The way that I write dialogue, I think, is best said by certain actors. Philip Baker Hall, chief among them. The way that I write dialogue exactly to the T is not best really for John Reilly. John Reilly needs to loosen it up a little bit. John Reilly needs to
put in his own breaks and pauses and kind of ignore my punctuation a little bit. And that's what's most successful for him and most successful for me watching and listening to him. But for Philip Baker Hall or Bill Macy, they do it and should do it spot on to how I've written it, you know? And you kind of discover what each actor needs, and which actors should have more room with the dialogue, and which actors just need to be corralled and made to say it exactly as is, you know? There are some actors whose greatest gift is not improvisation, you know, and there are some actors whose greatest gift is improvisation, and it's just kind of walking a very sort of fine line between how you kind of keep things on track, but keep it natural. So I guess when you make a movie, your equivalent of commas and semicolons and periods is the opticals, like dissolves or fade outs or even something that's not an optical, like a cut to black, you know. It's a sort of cinematic punctuation, let's say. And the first 20 minutes of this movie, the first reel essentially, is Sidney and John, essentially just the two of them. Again, that's very influenced by Melvin and Howard, and sort of taking the notion that if you can introduce two characters who are interesting enough and have them talk for 20 minutes, that you'll just kind of stick with them on their journey that follows. And I kind of took that and ran with it, I think, and my first reel of this movie is two guys talking. There's a very sort of pointed and specific punctuation, which is a fade out at the end of the reel, and a title card that says 2 years later. Now, people thought it was abrupt, and they can go fuck themselves. You know what I say? If it's a criticism that it shifts from a character piece to more of a noir piece, then fuck, that's a good one. I'll take that. That sounds great to me. I'd love to see a movie like that, you know, that somehow shifts from being a character piece to a noir piece to then a sort of little chamber drama in the middle, you know. Fuck yeah, I'll take that, and I think that's a good thing. Mixing it up a bit, you know. I'm obviously a very big fan of the gangster genre, you know. And one of my notions in writing this movie was you look at, like, White Heat, or you look at, you know, They Drive by Night, which wasn't really about gangsters, but it's about bad people, you know. But I just remember watching that movie a lot when I was writing. Or Bob Le Flambeur, which is a great fucking movie, which is such a big influence for me. Bob Le Flambeur is such a major influence on this movie. If you rent it, you'll see that I probably owe fucking Jean-Pierre Melville a lot of money in you know, for ripping him off, because it's just a great movie. Anyway, my notion is that you never... Imagine if one of those guys lived. Like, imagine James Cagney doesn't die at the end of White Heat, you know what I mean? Imagine that he lives, and it's 30, 40 years later, 50 years later even, and he's got to pay for what he's done in his own head. You know what I mean? Like, sticking with one of those gangster movies and kind of going, you know what, motherfucker, you're going to have to pay for something down the line, whether it's in your own mind before you go to sleep at night, you know, or whether it's to somebody else. And so that was the kind of notion that I had, like, fuck, let's see James Cagney, like, trying to make up for what he did wrong, going back to one of the people that we saw him killed in the movies and go like, fuck, how do I reach out? How do I repent, you know? And that's sort of where this came from.
Hi.
Hello. Says you remember Jimmy? His friend who lives up here?
Jimmy, thanks for the drink.
Hey.
Philip's a fucking tricky motherfucker. You never know what he's gonna need about the guy he's playing. You know what I mean? You never know what question he's gonna ask. So it kind of forces you to know everything about a character. You know what I mean? You really gotta know. Because I don't ever want him to ask me a question and for me to say, I don't know, Philip. I don't know. But he's not the kind of guy that asks, where was this guy born? What were his grades in high school? You know, I wouldn't know how to answer those questions anyway, and I know that he's not the kind of actor that's going to ask those questions. But what I'm saying is, he'll say, like, he'll just realize what's going on in a scene, little things, like Sam Jackson walks up in the Keno bar, you know, and Sidney shakes his hand and says, thanks for the drink, and then offers him a seat. Philip deciphers the beat, the small pause between the handshake and the offering of the seat, as he will say, I know that there is a beat here and that this is a domination, me trying to sort of subtly dominate Jimmy. Not to mention any possible race card that Sidney might have in his back pocket. you know, which is Sidney's probably from he's an old school guy. He's a fucking old guy who was brought up in a different generation. On the fucking East Coast in Atlantic City. Does he not like Jimmy as well because he's black? What can play in here, you know?
Play Keno, huh? What's that? A sign of aging?
It passes the time.
Sid and I saw a guy win 38 grand playing Keno once. Played all day, sat in the same spot, something like 12 hours. Must have cost him $4 grand to win the 38. Jesus.
Other night over at the El Dorado, I saw a cat have a heart attack right at the craft table. I mean,
I won't put much of that sort of thing into the script. You know, that's either there in... I'm trusting the actor so much, you know what I mean, that he's going to get that, or I'm going to let him know that in a rehearsal situation, do you know what I mean? Or that I've written it kind of properly enough that... Let me put it this way. If I write, Sidney shakes hands with Jimmy, Sidney says, Jimmy, nice to meet you, and then beat, and then have a seat. That beat is going to mean something to Philip. Hopefully that will read as something. Philip is going to decipher, you've written a beat here. There's a notion going on here. There's something going on. He knows who he's playing. He knows he's playing Sidney fucking from Atlantic Sydney. Sidney fucking gangster. Sidney with this kind of history. He's spotting, I'm looking at Sam Jackson. I'm looking at someone I don't want around my surrogate son. I'm spotting that he's black, which has got to mean something. He's spotting that there's a power play here. He's spotting that I've placed Philip in this booth where his back is to the wall. You know what I mean? Philip's going, my fucking back's against the wall. You know, I was like, yes, of course, your back's against the wall. Sidney's not going to fucking sit in a booth where his back is not against the wall. You know, he's just not. So all this stuff is going to go at work, and that sort of all that stuff hopefully gets compressed into 4 letters, B-E-A-T. Boom. You know what I mean? And good actors find that, and they know that. And they know that already. And if they know me, they know that that's what I mean. And we can talk about it specifically, but it's almost like it's a mile marker or an asterisk that says, yeah, there's some shit we got to talk about here. Beat. Good. Boom.
Believe me.
You said it as she walked away.
Hey, Jimmy, let's go play.
We're waiting on our drinks here.
Yeah, we'll get them at the tables.
You got a point. Sidney, it's a pleasure seeing you again. John here's got my digits. Anything you need in this town, call me.
There's 2 things that I love here. Listening to the music by John Bryan and Michael Penn. Bum, 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 bum. Da, da, da. You're listening to John Bryan play the xylophone. And this is the sort of Christmas time theme that they came up with, and this is sort of the xylophone sort of loungy kind of version. It's just so sort of hypnotic and great, and so wonderfully played by some brilliant musicians. And as we move into Philip Baker Hall, we're about to go into the Steadicam shot. One of my favorite things is to watch actors walk, or actors who walk well walk. And Philip Baker Hall walks like a motherfucker. God, he's good. And, you know, this is just a shot of a guy walking. But it's a guy in his setting. And it's a guy in his world. And I think it's a kind of cool thing to just take a breath and a relaxing moment to watch someone sort of walk through their world. I don't know where I got this kind of bug in my head, but Hit It Big. We see Hit It Big there on this big scoreboard, which is one of those just big accidents that happen. This Steadicam, this little thing we call the Steadicam, this S-T-A-D-I-C-A-M, it's this really fucking tricky thing because I think it's really overused, you know? And it can be overused if a director's lazy because they're very easy to use, they're very quick, there's a guy straps it on, you can kind of move anywhere with it, and they're very much abused. But if you realize what it feels like, which is kind of dreamy and kind of floaty, and you apply that, and you know that that's what it's gonna do, then you're using it well. This frame of Philip as he comes through the doors, this is a 300mm lens. I remember this lens well, actually.
Is this coming out or going in?
This is coming out.
It's coming out, okay.
I remember playing a gag and telling you to keep walking and walking and walking and then stopping and then walking because it's a very hard sort of shot to pull focus on for Mike Reba, who's the focus puller for both this movie and for Boogie Nights as well. And Gwyneth is about to come out of the bungalow.
This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I know, my character knows what she's been doing, and she knows that I know what she's been doing, and we both sort of agree not to talk about it, and So it's a wonderful kind of scene, a scene where everybody knows what's going on, including the audience, and yet nothing really is said about it.
For sure.
You walk around a casino or in the cocktail lounge, and you see these real cocktail waitresses, and that's where all the sort of notions of costume or hair and makeup come from. You know, you can look at Gwyneth in the coffee shop scene, or just outside the bungalow area there, and you see her kind of come out. She has a bit of razor burn on the top of her lip, you know, which I think is sort of wonderfully done by the makeup department. And that's the kind of notion that Gwyneth actually came up with. You know, she's coming out of this and she wants a little bit of red on her upper lip, you know. Yeah. Actors bring those kind of small touches, I think. Great actors do. And Gwyneth is certainly a great actor.
You go to school?
No.
This coffee shop scene that she does, she's so fucking direct. And I think she becomes very direct because Philip Baker Hall is demanding her to pay attention, you know? And I think Gwyneth, I really kicked Gwyneth's butt. When we did a rehearsal, she had this coffee cup in front of her, and she had a cigarette in front of her, and she was, like, playing with them, you know? And she was doing this scene, and I said, you fucking jackass, you do not touch the coffee cup, you do not touch your cigarette, you do not play with props, you have to act the scene. You are not going to do this prop heavy. And she was like, fuck! Asshole, you're taking away my tricks, you know? And I felt good that I'd spotted her tricks, you know? And she felt great that I'd spotted her tricks. Just saying, like, no, you got to address the scene. You got to address what you're saying. You're not going to play with your coffee cup. And Philip is so mesmerizing as an actor, and other actors really kind of perk up and go, I got to be on my shit. I'm acting with Philip Baker Hall. And Philip demands that kind of attention. And not in any overt way. He's not a fucking dick at all. He's the sweetest guy in the whole world, but he's just such a great actor. It's like, oh, I gotta act well. And Gwyneth just rose to the occasion. She was just like, I know that this is my scene. And I shouldn't be playing with my coffee cup. I know I gotta fucking play this. I know I gotta sort of face all the shit in this scene that I'm scared of. And she does. And God, she's so fucking good.
I don't do anything that I don't want to do. You understand?
Every time I see that scene, I flash to the memory of I have this dream. It's not that I have a dream, it's that I have this vision of standing on the wrong side of the camera and standing in your eye line.
When it's possible, in terms of the type of scene it is, where the camera is, how close the actors are to the lens and to the camera itself, Paul gets himself down in and under and around the camera. He curls in down there somewhere, and so that he has eye contact with you all the time. Many directors don't do this. Many directors watch the box. Many directors don't even watch the box. They stand off to the side someplace. I don't know what they're looking at for sure. But Paul gets right down in there so that it's very intimate what he does, and it could be disconcerting. Paul might be 2 or 3 feet away from you and locking eyes right into you. There's something about the hard focus and his physical presence, kinesthetically, inches away, that gives a kind of a dynamic to the performance that I'm not sure that you can achieve in quite the same way or any other way. It's unusual. Let's say there are other directors who do this. I've seen this a couple times. But Paul does it on virtually every shot. It tells the actor that the director still has an interest in what's going on in this movie. When Paul gets down there so close, it's almost like he is helping to will the appropriate performance from you. Because you sense, I mean, it's like even though he's not saying anything, I always sensed his will. He wanted this thing in a certain way. He wanted certain marks that not necessarily we had discussed, but I could sense it, that he wanted certain things to happen in certain steps along the way. And it was like some kind of thought line directly. And I don't think I'm the only actor who was affected by this either. I think the other actors in this movie were also affected by it in a way. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Interesting thing technically in this scene where Gwyneth is in the hotel room here, as we boom up from her boots to her, there's a small little thing that happens in the background. A light dims. One of the lights in the background is on a dimmer, would bring it down. That will happen again later in the movie, actually, and I'll point it out as it's happening. It's over Philip Baker Hall's monologue, where he's explaining to Sam that he doesn't want to die. And this sort of very subtle sort of dimming of lights, I like to do, and I kind of did a blatant ripoff from something that I saw in Silence of the Lambs. And it was a scene with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, where they're in the background, one of the source lights, one of the practicals, just dims the slightest bit. And I'd always thought I'd seen it, but then I started to think it was an optical illusion. When I listened to the audio commentary track of the Criterion version, I heard Jonathan Demme talking about it. And I was like, fuck, okay, good, it did happen. Because I thought for the longest time it did happen, I thought it was an optical illusion. And I've stolen it and just applied it in a couple times. I did it a couple times in Boogie Nights, too. Just the smallest, subtlest little lighting cue that dims down that, can mean a lot to a movie, if we wanted to talk real intellectually about it. But, boy, it's just so small and cool, and you can just kind of do a small fucking stroke with it, It's fun. And that happens over Gwyneth there. As she's sort of touching herself and kind of feeling very self-conscious and kind of preparing herself for what might come and asking, do you want to fuck me?
Now you really look at me as a piece of shit.
The framing here that happens with Philip Baker Hall and this sort of way that I compose these shots is very influenced by The Hustler. There's a wonderful scene with Piper Laurie and George C. Scott when he comes in the room and he sort of attacks. He kind of comes at her and they have this big argument. And there's a portion of him that's so dominating over her, and she's sitting on the bed, sort of just like Gwyneth is actually. You see George C. Scott's face in it, but there's a sort of something to the composition that's so sort of dominating, and just sort of terrifying. And it just, for me as a man watching it, just felt like every asshole moment you've ever had as a man. I don't know, it's very scary the way that the man was put over the woman, the way he was sort of attacking her, He pulled it off. I don't know. He really pulled off the composition so that you felt like the threat of the male waist. Like, from the neck down was this fucking, like, weapon somehow that was coming at Piper Laurie from George C. Scott.
Hey, Captain.
Morning, Captain.
Good morning. Yeah, Captain, that is a nickname that Clementine has given me. That is not for you.
Okay.
I think Clementine is sort of loosely based on a couple people that I knew, a couple girls that I knew from Reno and from Los Angeles as well, who worked in casinos, and always had to kind of tread this line of, even if they had like a crush on a guy and they wanted to go make out in his room, you know what I mean, just meeting a guy in a bar, but they worked at that hotel, they were always sort of restricted because they could be considered prostitutes, or they would get fired from their job, Something that interested me about it, and kind of like brought out the Sydney in me. I don't know, of wanting to feel like, oh my goodness, that maybe I was trying to look into or figure out somehow.
Well,
Why do you have two TVs?
oh, well, see, they got pay-per-view here. That's this box, and there's a wire that comes up from the front desk that goes through this box, and then when you pick a pay movie, it tells the front desk that you got a pay movie. So what you have to do is get these little things off. You stick a key inside this little cuff right here and twist it around, and then you take the wire that comes right out of the wall that brings the movie. You take that and you put it straight into the TV. So you gotta use a regular TV, so I bring this one with me wherever we go, and I just take the cable that comes from the wall straight into this TV, and you get free movies.
Cool.
But don't say anything to front desk or anything.
No, I won't.
'Cause they'd probably make me pay for all of it. So, I gotta go talk to Sid for a second, all right? I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey,
Hey,
how'd you do last night?
fair. You?
I love the way these speeches are written. The way Paul has written these speeches. They there's a funny kind of I won't say staccato, but there definitely is a rhythmic base to them. And I had command of that coming in through the many discussions that Paul and I had, and through the work that I had done in the year and a half that I had the script before we actually got it shot. So I was able to find vocally the rhythms that Paul had written into the speeches, and it's a wonderful kind of rising and falling staccato, and he was very consistent in the writing, and that permitted me then to do this vocally and to make it consistent throughout also.
Good. All right. I'll see you later, right?
Yeah, I'll probably be in the sports book or maybe poker.
Okay.
It's musical.
Maybe I'll see you there.
It's mellifluous in some way, the way he's written it. And for me, it was musical. I mean, I was hearing. I don't know specifically what any particular passage of music, but when I have the good fortune to work with great writing in the theater or in film, I always do hear some kind of a musical thing in my own head, not related to the soundtrack or anything, but it's something that guides me as I go. And I look for these things also. As an actor, I look for these kind of little musical phrases and riffs, and I love it. I mean, I really search these things out, and Paul's writing is full of this kind of stuff, which when you see a film, one of Paul's films, and you find yourself being seduced by the language, part of it is this kind of unique and original rhythmic structure that he's discovered in the writing that poses a great challenge for the actor, but if you can solve it, it's like money in the bank.
Come on, old time, you gonna join
Phil Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman, who the day that I first saw Philip Seymour Hoffman in Scent of a Woman, directed by Marty Brest, and I remember sitting in the theater and seeing that movie and just falling in love with Phil Hoffman. Like, fuck, whoever this guy is, I gotta have him. I gotta see him. I gotta know him. I gotta have this guy. You know, it's such an incredible performance. And so when I wrote this, I wrote it with Phil in mind. You know, and I must admit that it's kind of in the tradition of characters that he's done, this sort of loudmouth, obnoxious asshole. You know, but I didn't feel bad about it because I really wanted it to hopefully be the top. I said, well, I'd like to be the kind of writer and director that gives actors sort of an opportunity to do something they haven't done before. But I was essentially knew I was calling Philip Hoffman up to do something that he'd done a version of before, but I didn't feel bad about it because I thought, we'll make it the best version, and then I'll give him an opportunity to do something else, you know. So that's why I wrote Scotty for him, you know. But the first day that I met Phil Hoffman in person was the day that we shot the scene. It was really actually the only scene in the script that was written very, very sparsely, you know. Like what I mean is that it wasn't all written out because I knew it should be an improvisational scene. It should be just shit happening, and it just the only way to really get it right was just stuff had to happen on the day, you know. That I knew what numbers would be rolled. You know what I mean? I knew the structure of the scene. He'd roll an 8, and so the 8's the point. So now we've got to get to the hard 8 and everything else, and there'd be 3 numbers in between before he got to the hard 8, or got to the easy 8. So I knew that. So if you have that kind of a structure, you can kind of get an improvisation going because you know that there's corralling mechanisms that will pull someone back, you know, from going too crazy. And Phil Hoffman will go crazy because he's just amazing. And so we met Phil the first day when we shot this scene, and we just sort of started working through stuff, and he just started coming up with all of this stuff. I mean, he basically came up with 80% of the stuff that he does. You know, this, you know, Sister Sledge and all that kind of stuff is all Phil Hoffman. I think we were all just really blown away by him and just fell in love with him, and we're so excited, you know, to have him, you know. And we had really quite a good time.
All right. Shit! I'm sorry, big time.
The scene with Phil Hoffman is certainly a pivotal scene, you know. It's kind of the scene where you see like a little dink in the Sydney armor, you know. And And then it of course launches us into the motel room scene, which is where we see Sidney in a totally new light, you know, where it's the first time he swears, which is a really big thing, you know, in a movie where language is a really big deal. To hear this guy swear for the first time is like a massive thing. Not to mention you see this sort of criminal come back. You know, you're like, boom, this guy knows what the fuck he's doing. Oh my God. He's wiping off fingerprints. He's smashing guys over the head with a gun. He's sort of analyzing the information that he's getting from John in a really sort of criminal way, you know, that he knows what information needs to be gotten, you know. Now, who's been here? Who else knows you're here? Who's seen this? Who's seen that? You know, and so you're watching him analyze this information, and you're like, this fucking guy, you're just another clue into that this guy's not maybe what he appeared to be for the longest time, which was this wonderful sort of dad figure. I mean, he'd always been mysterious, but it's the first sort of, now we're knowing that the mystery is not such a mystery anymore. It's sort of, we're starting to sort of see what Sidney is.
This was a difficult scene here. I think it's 16 pages.
It's like 16 or 18 pages. It's something like that. Yeah. I think the setup to the motel sequence starts, you know, when Sidney drives in, and the sort of long Steadicam shot that follows him from his car pulling in, walking up the steps, along the balcony, knocking outside the doors, holding on the back of his head, and essentially it's sort of making it really sort of subjective camera. It's not sort of his point of view, but it's right there on back of him. You're really with him. It's very first person, you know.
That's one of the scenes that we had played around with quite a bit at Sundance.
Yeah.
Maybe because it was a 16-page scene, and we kind of got hung up on the door sequence, knowing that maybe we could delay getting to the other 15 pages or something, which was really complicated. It's like the door part was the easy part. So
it's over a minute, you know, which is, you know,
before we go in,
we did two masters that ran a full mag. John and Philip both were like, wow, what a luxury to run the scene all the way through. And I was like, wow, what do you mean? And I was like, some directors don't shoot a master or don't shoot or shoot it in such piecemeal that an actor never gets to run the scene from beginning to end. And I felt real like proud that, you know, like, all right, I did good for the actors, you know, but it wasn't like I was trying to, like, you know, be the actor-friendly director. And then suddenly when he goes in the motel, you go to movie land. You go to the sort of rules of suspense, you know, which are, you know, as long as you cannot show them, don't show them, which I think is a pretty good rule. And maybe the concept of just holding on Sidney and John in their faces, sort of it tries to stretch that rule really far, as let's watch them react. And then as they move, we'll move with them, and then move into the room. You know, so it's not taking it too far to a stylistic extreme. You know, it lets the sort of their movement be our movement into the room. You know, but while they're sort of standing there, we get to just kind of watch them and watch their faces. And you know, it's great. It's great fun to watch an audience. And this goes. You could boil this down to, besides any sort of cinephile explanation of all this stuff, it's fucking fun to watch an audience watch this movie and watch that section and watch them just go, what? Show me. On that level, you know, if you're just operating on that level, fuck, do it. That's great. You know, it's like an external emotional response from an audience. You know, I can remember my friend seeing this movie, and it was just a rough cut screen that I had, but he screamed, and he was at the back of the theater. He said, show me. And I was like, cool, you know. Just if we're going to pretend that it's that we're going for, then let's do that, you know.
In a way, all three of the characters in this scene have a breakdown. This is like mass breakdown, and each character has his own mode of coping with the horror of what the various discoveries are. There's a lot of discovery for each of the actors in the scene, and the fun and also the challenge and the complexity of it is how, you know, and how masterfully he handled this, not only in the writing but in the way he chose to film it and to record it. That he's dealing with his three major characters, all breaking down, all having life-altering discoveries, all in How long does that scene take to play? By that, I don't even know.
It's like 16 minutes.
It is like about 16 minutes. Yeah, it's a big hunk of the movie. It's all, and this was a tiny motel room too. It was very claustrophobic.
This is a real location. I don't.
And imagine all that equipment and all those people in there, plus room for us to move around and to find our spots and our spaces there. It was difficult. It was very hot and oppressive. Things that probably worked for the scene in terms of the final result, but made it difficult to do. But also finding the key, the appropriate key. You know, it's one thing to find what I call the right harmonic for a given moment or a given sequence. It's one thing to find that if you're by yourself in a scene, which is probably without dialogue. It's another thing when there are two, but when there are three people in a scene, all of equal weight. It's very hard to find the key, the right emotional color. A given actor's instinctive mode of making these discoveries, and then his subsequent breakdown. An actor's mode of making these discoveries and then his breakdown and his recovery would be one thing if there was only one actor there, or if he were by himself. But with the three, the mix, it becomes very, very complicated for each actor to find the right key for the moment. It's easy to get off tune in a scene like this, not because there are three people, but because there are three people of equal weight who all have huge tasks in the scene. We all have to make these amazing discoveries, and then we all have to, in our own way, fall apart with the discovery and recover, and then come back together in some way. So it's a huge scene, probably the most difficult scene in the movie, I would say.
This is a very fucked up situation here.
Well, you promised you'd help me.
I didn't promise anything.
Yeah, at the door. Come on. Sid, you gotta help me.
You don't have to help us.
I sure as hell don't.
Then why don't you just get the fuck out of here?
Oh, good.
If you look at most movies, it's very rare to find a scene where there are three major characters in one scene where they all have violent things, emotionally violent things happen to them, and how they extricate themselves and how they respond to it, plus the effect on the other people and so on. This is really tough stuff, and that's why you don't see many scenes like that, because it's very hard to handle and very hard to get it sorted out directorially. So I was amazed when I saw the first rough cut of how he put this together.
Get him the chair, will you?
Whenever I'm in movies, I always think about it. I used to direct a lot in the theater. I've never directed a film, and the more I learn about it, I know that I never will. It's complicated beyond belief for a simple theater director. But I remember when we were filming this, I was thinking, how the hell? Where would you start? Where would you start? I mean, what? Start maybe with the logic of what's going on, but then what responses do we want? Whose face do we want to see? What reaction is more important than which other reaction? Which reaction advances the script? Okay, this one advances the script, but this one inhibits the development of this character. So, I mean, it's like, whoa. It's like, in this kind of a scene, I mean, I don't know how you ever put it together, really. And with the fluidity, and I think everybody's character being properly served, the story being advanced, all this stuff is it's miraculous, really, how he put this together, because he doesn't know how he put it together.
Because he thought that he was smart and I was stupid, and I'm not stupid.
Well, this is a pretty stupid situation, isn't it?
Well, we'll see how fucking stupid I am when I get my money, won't we?
You know the first thing they should have taught you at hooker school? You get the money up front.
Fuck you.
Sid, don't talk to her like that.
Hey, John, I'm having a conversation with Clementine.
Yeah, well, don't talk to her like that.
Shut the fuck
In the
up.
theater, it's very common in a lot of theater pieces, contemporary theater pieces especially, where each of the major characters has, as it were, a big scene. And we sort of see this coming. He's has his big scene. She's had hers. I wonder if that other guy, when's he going to have, oh, there it is. He's going to have his now. So we sort of anticipate. But what's wonderful about the way this scene is structured is that we don't get a sense of like, oh, okay, we're going to see John break down, and then we're going to see Gwyneth break down, and then we're going to see Sidney break down. We don't get a sense that like we're going in sequence. It's like each one's going to have their big moment here. You don't get that sense at all. It's just like this thing is all just kind of flowing together. A million things can happen, that could throw it off, that could throw it off track, or that could ruin this invisible sensibility, this fine tuning that we all had to each other. Again, acting is a mysterious business, and the better the material, the more mysterious I think it becomes in a certain way. You may go through a scene one time, but let's say a very emotional scene, where a lot of stuff is required emotionally from you. But the third time you go through it, your emotional equipment may be operating in a way that it does not repeat the way it did the other time. It may go off in some other direction entirely. Now, you've got two other actors there who are waiting for not the line cue. Let's say that there are no problems with the lines. They're waiting for certain emotional cues. They have been trained in the previous rehearsals, the previous run-throughs, to expect certain emotional cues along the way. Now suddenly, you're off in a different direction. They're not getting those emotional cues. So now their work may begin to look false and empty because they were prepared for something that's not happening, or something different is happening. So, and this is where a scene like this can really fall apart. And it can fall apart often to the degree that it cannot be resurrected. And then you get into the question of temperament. And you get into some wonderful actors who, as their technique or as their ability to recreate emotionally what is essential in the scene begins to change or falter, some actors become very depressed or very angry when this begins to happen, and then really become incapable of maintaining this through line that everybody else, including the director, has to have to make the scene work. So then that adds another thing to the mix. And then other actors then can begin to become resentful that the other actor is not giving them what they need to get through it. It can really get out of control. And obviously here it did not.
This man owes me. He fucked me, and now he's gonna pay me.
Don't be crazy, all right? Don't be crazy, honey. I mean, this is the only thing that we can do, okay?
And I don't mean to suggest either that this was just three people who were all in love with each other who went up there and shot this thing in a perfect way. We did have some bobbles in this. We did have some falling down and getting up and dusting ourselves off and trying to restart. And I mean, it wasn't like all like, oh, it's great. What's the next scene? I got this one out of the way. Yeah. This scene is the kind of scene that can make you old before your time, because actors can get out of control in a scene like this. And it can be very, very hard to get them all back together. Again, if it's a scene where one actor, where one character breaks down, and the other two are basically witnesses, that scene is easier to control from a directorial standpoint, because there isn't as much. But where everybody has to go through a change all in one 15-minute deal, there are just a million things that can happen. And some of them did happen to us. And, we somehow got through it anyway, and we're all still talking to each other. More than that, we all have great affection and respect for each other. So, but it's an education.
Probably one of the main problems with this movie is that it not anything that it does structurally that's a little bit different is pretty successful, I think. One thing that it might not do that it does that's untraditional, that might not be successful, is that basic thing of character motivation. In other words, why are these characters doing what they're doing? In other words, why is Sidney doing what he's doing? That question is not answered until 4 reels into a 5-reel movie. At the end of reel 4, actually. That's a choice I made. The choice I made was, it's a mystery. Now, it was a mystery to me, actually, while I was writing it. Probably, I realized I deciphered the mystery about 20 or 30 pages in for myself. As soon as I really started writing these characters, I realized what I was writing was that this is a man who was guilty of something towards him, and he was coming back. And so you're finding this stuff. Now, so I start formulating this as I'm writing, and I find it in my mind, but I make the decision that I'm going to make it a mystery. That I'm going to make it a mystery of why he has befriended John, why he has taken him under his wing, why he has treated him like this, and why he has taken him to Reno, and why 2 years later they are still together. Now, I made that choice. I went with it, and it's not something you're supposed to do from the screenwriting book of 101. You're supposed to know real early why the hell are people doing what they're doing. But I made the decision because I thought, well, It'll be more fun. And if I can pull it off, it'll be really cool. And if I can't, well, fuck it. And I thought I could pull it off because they're such interesting characters. And you could kind of be John Riley, taking you through the movie. Why is this guy doing this? Well, that's what we're asking in 5 minutes. That's what I'm asking in the first 5 minutes, even though I fucking know Philip Baker Hall and love him. Why the fuck is he going to get with him? But I get sucked into it. I get sucked into Philip Baker Hall. I get sucked into Sidney, and I trust him. And hopefully that's what you would do to an audience, is make the audience trust Sidney, you know, so that the backlash is just as wonderful for an audience as it is, you know, as it is potentially for John. So I think you either engage in the movie that way, and if you trust Sidney, then you have that much more an enjoyable experience watching the movie when the comeuppance comes and the information comes out of why he is behaving as he is towards John. And boy, if you're not, then I didn't get you anyway, and you were fucked, and I don't know, you wasted $750.
Don't fuck with me.
Said I'm not fucking with you. It's a front desk. I don't know.
Jimmy knows we're here.
Look, Jimmy knows we're here, but it doesn't matter, all right? Let's just go. Let's go.
There was a model in my life for Sidney as I began to work on the character. I don't know. When I say I don't know, I actually don't know. I suspect possibly. I don't know if he ever killed anybody. He might have had somebody killed. He was a restaurant owner and a very heavy gambler. And I worked at his restaurant when I was going to college. And we developed kind of a father-son relationship. And I lived up in an apartment up above the restaurant. And he kind of let me make my own hours when I was going to college. And he used to go to these very heavy card games that a lot of restaurant owners went to after they closed their bars or their restaurants. The guys would, and this was in the early 50s, the guys would all come in with $10 or $15 or $20,000 restaurant receipts, bar receipts, and they'd all sit down. They were all armed. They'd all have their weapons and put them down on the table, and then they'd play high stakes poker. And Jack used to take me to these things with him, and I got to. It was a great life study to see all these guys sitting around there playing for huge amounts of money and wondering, you know, does anybody ever get shot here? What would provoke it? What would make one of these guys pull out his, you know, weapon? And Jack himself was like Sidney. And in fact, as I'm watching this now, in certain shots, it seems to me I'm almost seeing Jack up there. The only difference maybe between Jack and Sidney, and maybe not such a difference because we took a critical scene out of the movie, which is where Sidney calls his wife and he's drunk.
Ex-wife.
His ex-wife. My old friend Jack was a drunk, and he probably would have he would lose his restaurant. He would eventually lose the cash gambling, then he would lose the restaurant. And he ended up more than once being a dishwasher in what had formerly been his own restaurant. He would be the owner one day, and the next day he would be, this happened twice that I know of, maybe more actually. But I knew 2 times. And then a year later, he bought it back somehow, and he'd be running the restaurant again. But he was a little bit like Sidney. It was a little hard I couldn't quite measure Jack. I didn't quite know where he was coming from. And he had this kind of paternal interest in me, and yet I always felt that if I made the wrong move, that he could become violent. I was never sure. I know he was mixed up a little bit with the gangs and with the mobs, and this is in Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up, because he had slot machines and pinball machines in a restaurant in a city that had absolute strong laws that these things were not allowed. And yet he and a few other guys with restaurants did have these machines, and they were paying off the police. And I know that the collectors would come by and take several $1,000s a day out of his. It was a very hot place for these machines. The restaurant was kind of a sideline. He made his real money from the machines, the pinball machines and a couple slots he had in the back. But he was a man of taste also. I mean, he went to the opera. He went to the theater. He bought very expensive suits. He wasn't gaudy. He had very expensive cars. He had all these beautiful young women that he would be parading around. And yet he was like a hoodlum, sort of. He had a master's degree. He was a very interesting mix. He was my model for Sidney as a character study. Jack was. As far as the script would fit. I mean, as far as Paul's script would fit this character of Jack. And as I said, I don't know if he ever killed anybody, but I suspect if he didn't, I bet he maybe hired somebody to mess somebody up. I think he might have done that a few times.
Jesus Christ, John.
But Niagara Falls is like a regular honeymoon place.
Yeah, but I've been there.
John, go to Niagara Falls.
Okay.
Hey, give me a hug. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
I mean, a great thing happened here with Sydney, and that is, first of all, that Paul wrote it with me and John in mind. Okay, that's the first thing. I mean, we kind of a leg up on the roles to begin with, because he did have specific people in mind when he was. The other thing is that we sat with this script for almost 2 years before we did it, and I worked on this script a little bit every single day for 2 years. I mean, I was doing all kinds of other things, but I knew that this movie was going to be made sooner or later. So I continued to work on this all the time. So by the time we got ready to shoot this, I was that guy. And I was ready to be that guy. This is unusual, to have a script. This is a luxury, is what I'm saying. We see this more often in the theater. I had the luxury in Secret Honor when I shot the film of having played it in the theater already over 100 times. So by the time we shot the movie, I knew who that character was. I mean, everything was functioning by that time. I wasn't like in a discovery process. Not that I didn't continue to make discoveries, because I did play it in the theater for several years after that. But still, the major discovery process was over when the film was made. And I was in control of who that guy was. Just as in Sydney, I was in control of who that guy was. How many days did we work on the motel room scene?
4 or 5 days.
Really?
Yeah. We shot for 4 or 5 days. Which is,
Seemed like one day to me. I don't know. It was kind of like, well, the hours we were keeping were so messed up, though. I mean, we were basically working nights. But we were going longer each day than the day before.
Yeah.
So we kept pushing the clock around.
We were kind of pushing the barrier a lot because essentially you can't see outside the windows, you know. So it was the first time we were in a situation in a night shoot where you couldn't see outside the windows, so you could kind of keep pushing the morning envelope even further and further, and it got a little bit, we all got a bit dreamy, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Look up again, John. I really won't, I promise you.
See, the thing that's possible in the theater and that is not possible in film, the thing that's possible in theater is that for 2 or 2.5 hours, you can live that experience, whatever it may be, in the theater. If you're playing a principal part in the theater for 2.5 hours, you can really become that person and live that through that series of experiences. And you can experience, if it's a very emotional play, you will reach a point in your development of the character when you will be able to experience those emotions for real. You will feel with that. You will become that character for that time on stage. This is a little more difficult. It's a lot more difficult in film because of you don't get to, in a 2-hour film, even in a film in which you appear in almost every frame, you still don't get in a single 2-hour block to live that series of experiences. You have to keep manufacturing them over a period of whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So it's that to me, and then what you were saying about the physicality of it, the physicality in film is different because on the stage, whatever you do reads. Everything you do in film does not read unless the camera is seeing it. So you're seeing that particular walk. You're saying it's one of the few times in which we see him full body, except maybe for the opening when you see his back moving away from us toward the restaurant. So in film, you're mostly looking at from here up most of the time. I mean, in action films, we see actors jumping around and hanging off of cliffs. In fact, it usually isn't them. Actually, it's usually somebody else talking about body language and the importance and what body language can convey. In action films, it's often the stuntman whose full body we're watching. And then we cut to Bruce Willis's eyes and so on. But sorry, Bruce.
You're gonna get your fucking ass kicked now.
But the physicality is very different in films because it's so selective. It's so selective. if the director decides that he wants to show a certain aspect of the actor's physicality and how it, and then you may not have that at your command right at that moment, because that's not the way you rehearse for film. You don't rehearse for film in that way. You don't, because you don't get to do the whole experience all at once. So it's different, I'm saying, and it's more difficult. From my point of view, it's more difficult because it evolves naturally in the theater when you're working on a role. As you observed, you put all these little details together, and it may seem a little artificial and a little mechanical in the beginning, but as it begins to come together over a period of several weeks, by the time hopefully you get to opening night, this all becomes one piece, and now we begin to see this whole person emerge with as much information and emotion conveyed by his body as there is conveyed by the language or by his voice. But in film, this is quite a bit different, because we rarely see in a film for very long periods of time the entire body. It's mostly the face and the eyes. So.
Something to say to me?
You know, that was a really fucked up situation back there. You,
We had one day of rehearsal with Sam.
Yeah, we did.
We had one day of rehearsal with Sam about a week before we started shooting, which was pretty good. But I agree with Philip that we didn't really have enough time like we did with Gwyneth or John in terms of everyone getting to know each other and really sort of living with each other. But then again, that kind of works for the movie. That works if there's any kind of little sort of confusion there. I think, like Philip said, there can be that can kind of work to the benefit of the movie. You know, I think there's something kind of interesting too, that the biggest star in the movie is the kind of outsider, you know, is the bad guy. God, that's no personal reflection on Sam at all. I'll love Sam, but it's just kind of interesting. I thought that was kind of a cool thing.
So you don't think that she called the cops, huh?
I had seen him in Pulp Fiction, and I had seen him in the movie that he did with Nicolas Cage.
Kiss of Death?
Yes, well, I'm in that movie too. That's right. And no, the other movie.
Amos and Andrew.
Amos and Andrew, yeah. So I was already a big fan of Sam Jackson's when I met him. Sam earned my affection when there was a screening of Kiss of Death that he saw, and I had not seen it. And the way Kiss of Death went, I wasn't sure that I was even still in the movie. I remember I asked, he had seen it that afternoon, the first day I met him up there, I think, and I said, he said he'd seen the movie, and I said, am I still in it? He said, oh yeah, you in it. So, I remember the way he said that. Sam was great. He was great to work with. I mean, he's such a powerful actor and an artist. I mean, he's really, you know, you tell Sam the rules of the game, and he's right there. He'll play the game. I mean, it's great. I mean, he's just cooperative and sensitive to our budgetary constraints and our quick shooting schedule and the way we had to do things there. And he was right there every minute. And in the scenes that I had to do with him, those were just life experiences for me. They were really great, and I really enjoyed working with him. The opportunity to do these wonderful scenes with an actor of such power and intelligence was great.
That's over.
You know, I mean, he's been at this for 25 years. You know, he's been doing this a long time, and he knows what he's doing. And there's something about Sam as a person that's just very solid, and it was reaffirmed at that party at the agent's house, and where he was at that party, and I had a chance. I hadn't talked to him or seen him since we had done the movie, and we were talking just like, you know, we had not stopped talking from 2.5 years before.
Where you going? Sydney, Sid. Hey,
I can remember asking you. I can remember when we were doing the scene where Sam smashes the window and threatens him with the gun. That Philip's first instinct was maybe not as large, actually, as I wanted it to be. Do you remember that? Which you know, Philip's instincts are usually very A, spot on, but B, they're also to just sort of play things very directly, you know, and I thought that it needed to go a little bit bigger, and bigger is a direction I don't usually ever give, you know, but that was one time where I said bigger, you know, and I think just maybe the combination of really how I knew the sort of camera would feel. You know, I could tell Philip the sort of size of it, but, you know, the sort of momentum that the sort of handheld camera would have and everything in his face, and sort of how that smashing of the glass was going to sort of shock you into the scene and scare the shit out of you, that I had to sort of bring, that was my one direction to Philip. I mean, you don't really give direction, you know what I mean, that often to great actors. You don't, you know what I mean? You know, every once in a while you remind them to keep it simple if you've done too many takes. But that was probably one of maybe 2 or 3 directions, at least on the set, that I gave you. And I think I would just sort of, you know, put little quotes under what Philip said about the writing doing the job. And I said this before, and that, like, we don't even have to talk if I've done my job well as a writer. You know what I mean? Like, as a director, I just like keeping your sense of humor, because that's my job is really in the writing. I mean, that's why I'm writing right now, and it's taking me so long. You know, it's a very long movie. It's very complicated and everything else, but I'm doing so much work right now, and it's basically because my job will be over. As soon as I finish writing, I'm like, all right, home free. All right, hand it over to Philip, hand it over to Riley, hand it over to everybody else. Here we go. And so I would just sort of put quotes underneath what he just said.
This was the first day or night of shooting on this movie that we're watching right now. And I remember this extremely complex monologue that Paul had written here. And I remember watching Sam, and Sam and I, this is our first scene together, and it's a big one for both of us. And I remember being impressed, even though I was already a big fan of Sam's and had seen him in 3 important performances on the screen before, still I was very happy to see in his eyes that he was tracking exactly what he should have been tracking. He was right on the beat every moment when we were shooting this scene. Now, again, it isn't just a matter of good actors and bad actors either. It's I mean, many times in film work, looking into an actor's eyes, I will often see what I think sometimes is the wrong thing, that he's pursuing another objective that is not the objective that has to do with where this scene is going or where this moment is going. But it was very comforting working with Sam, because he was always, it seemed to me, where he should be. In a scene where you are confronting each other, if you don't feel that you are getting from him appropriate responses or appropriate cues, then you're a little bit lost as to how to respond then back.
But you know what, Philip? You told me this at the time. We'd sat with the movie for so long, you know. We'd been with it for so many years trying to get financing that it kind of wasn't a kick in the pants to launch right into that monologue. I mean, I think you knew it so well. I mean, we did I think 3 takes of that, and I used number 2. That's a massive monologue. That's like a full page of dialogue, but he just nailed it. And I think that was because what I thought, and that's what you subsequently said to me, was, well, we sat with this thing for 2 years. We know it so well.
We did. All that is true. It was still a little scary, though, because, well, first of all, Sam and I had just met, like a few hours before that. So we were reaching for our actor rapport, which I think really sort of happened a little later in some of our scenes. So we were both a little tentative, I think, Sam and I were. I don't think that shows on the screen, or if it does, it probably would be positive, because the guys, it was a very tentative scene for both of them. Both of them are in dangerous and vulnerable situations there. But it was for that scene to be the first scene shot in the movie was a little scary. It was scary from my point of view as an actor, because whatever happened that night in that scene, I was kind of stuck with that for the rest of the film. Not having, as it were, to live up to it, but rather to make. I was so conscious when we were doing it of trying not to hit any notes that later on would not reference back or forward. It's like starting in the middle at a high point scene. It's like it really is like tightrope walking. It was because there would be other scenes that you could start in the middle with that would require less of an investment and would and thereby be less risky. But this was risky actor-wise, I felt, because I felt, boy, if I do something here that I can't justify, either back or forward, then it's there. It's So I was afraid of there being a really false note in the performance overall as a result of starting on such a highly charged emotional scene. The thing about eye contact depends on the character and on the scene too, because I mean, if it's the kind of character who would have trouble maintaining eye contact, then that's part of what you would do with that character. But the other actor would understand that, and he would take his cues from your inability to maintain eye contact or your intention to not maintain whatever it was. You might be doing it on purpose. Your character might be doing it on purpose. He may be evasive. He may be dishonest. He may be whatever. But the eyes are, as they are important on the screen for the audience, they're important for the actors in dealing with each other. Whether you are both maintaining uninterrupted eye contact or not, still that contact or lack of contact is important. I mean, the eyes are everything.
If there's 3 actors on the planet you go to with massive exposition, in other words, when you're a screenwriter and you haven't done your job, give it to one of 3 guys, Sam, Philip, or Bill Macy, and just hand it off and just go like, can you tell me that the Mach 3 does 180 miles an hour in this 3-page monologue? And they can do it, They can really help any screenwriter who cheats, and make it seem okay. Because they've all just, they're all 3 to me, that kind of, I don't know why we're talking about Bill Macy. He's not even in this fucking movie. He's a fucking dolt from Florida, But let's talk about Philip and Sam. It's similar in that way. My favorite kind of actor is someone who's so natural and so honest and real, but is also a movie actor. You know what I mean? In other words, sort of fulfilling the obligation of the movie actor, which is to entertain, but also at the same time fucking keep it straight and narrow and real and honest, which is this sort of trick. I don't know how the fuck they do it, but they do it.
Hello.
Sid? Hey, Sid.
Bring in the John Riley light. John Riley has a John Riley light that Bob Elsfoot and I bring us the John Riley light, which is just a minor sort of bounce that happens off a sort of white board essentially that just kind of pops up into his eyeballs. His eyes are very hard to light because he's a very sort of strong forehead, and he casts a sort of large shadow over his eyes, and it's not a joke really. I mean, and you have to really kind of concentrate on getting his eyes, or not getting his eyes, if you want to do that. But generally you like to get him if it seems okay.
She's good. Clem. She's good. She sends her love. Yeah, I will. I really love her, Sid. I mean, I know that whole thing and everything, but I really do.
Again, in the theater, when you have scenes like this in the theater, they will be carefully rehearsed over a period of a number of weeks, 4 or 5 or even 6 weeks sometimes, and they'll be honed and finessed, and by the time you present them in front of an audience, everybody is, I mean, if everything works the way it should work, everybody is on the same harmonic venue. But in film, it's not that I'm afraid of looking bad in the movie. It's not that I'm afraid that the finished product will somehow, I don't know, reveal something about my lack of technique or my lack of skill or my lack of character or my lack of worth as a human being. But you do have to trust that director. And because you don't have that feedback from the audience, and you don't have those weeks and weeks of rehearsal that you have in the theater where you can refine and refine and refine. You're there, it's you and the camera and the other actor and the director. And you have to feel that, you must feel that what he's doing is best for you and best for the movie. You have to feel both of those things at the same time. And I even though, and Paul and I have talked about this a couple of times, there were a couple of instances, and I'm not even sure what they were now, but there were a couple of instances when I did not necessarily agree with a certain approach to a moment or to a scene that Paul had. I did not in every instance agree that was the way I wanted to do it. However, I trust him, and I worked for a great many directors over the years, both in the theater and in film, that I didn't trust at all. And as soon as you don't trust a director, then you really are on different pages. And it doesn't mean that the finished product might not still be very good. It might. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be very bad. But we're talking about this kind of this collaboration that leads to something greater than the sum of the parts. And for this kind of result to happen, this kind of all-out trust, I think, has to be there.
Well, the nature of the conclusion is just sort of, God, where the hell else can it go, you know? Where the hell else can it go but someone's going to get hurt, you know? Someone's going to die. One of these four people that we've met is going to die. I think you know that pretty instantly when you meet the movie. Just the sort of the tone of it and style of it tells you that someone's gonna get hurt, and it turns out to be Sam. And hopefully this movie just can reach, you know, in a movie that's very emotional, it can reach just a logical conclusion. Logically, Sam has to die, and Sidney's a very logical person, you know. You're threatening me, and you're going to sort of invade my family. In other words, John and Clementine, and I can't let that happen, so you're going to die, you know? And it's kind of cool when you can get to that point, and usually the sort of end is the easiest part to write, actually. If you've sort of done your work the whole way along, the sort of fastest and funnest part of the writing is the end, because you just get to logic. You just get to, well, what's going to happen next? This is what's going to happen. Sam's going to die.
There were alternatives discussed, Joe. We'll hit you on that for a while. There were alternatives discussed.
I guess I've met my fair share of guys who gamble and play cards and stuff, and it's an interesting lot. I wouldn't say that I'm a real participator in the sort of high level underworld, but you know what? If you go to Vegas enough, or if you go to Reno enough, and you spend enough time there, which I did, you know, as a kid, I spent a lot of time playing craps and blackjack. Then you sort of see and witness fellows like Sidney, you know, fellows who are very well dressed and very well mannered, who treat it as a profession as opposed to a game, you know, which is a very sad thing, and a very sad and complicated thing, because it is a game, and it is a losing game. I mean, gambling is a fucking losing game. Unless, like he says, you can count cards. The wonderful thing I like about Sidney, I'm sorry to just get on a track here, is he's so full of contradictions. I mean, it's not visible, and it's not there unless you really know a lot about gambling. It's sort of, you can't win. You can't fucking win. You cannot win. It's impossible. Unless you have a skill like counting cards, and then if you do, they know that, and you will not be allowed in there. You know, you're not going to be allowed in a casino if you can count cards. They're going to know that. But here's this guy who's so fucking spot on in his life, and his suits are pressed, and his fucking shit is spot on. But he's gambling. He's fucking gambling. He's playing craps. Now, there are methods of craps that you can play and treat it like a job. It's a game where you can bet good luck and bad luck. You can make a job out of it. If you want to spend 8 hours at a crap table, you can make $12.50 an hour betting good luck and bad luck, and just sort of betting against yourself and betting with yourself. You know what I mean? You can make a couple bucks an hour, which is probably a better job than digging ditches. But essentially, what is that? I mean, that's... And can he handle being that, Sidney? No, he can't. And that's why he makes mistakes, like sort of betting a hard 8 and letting this guy get to him. And I think it's just going to be an interesting thing for someone who's so fucking spot on with his life. And I remember when I wrote this scene, I actually fucked up. I fucked up because Sam walks in the door with Melora Walters, who's a great actress, who's also in Boogie Nights. And I had Sam walking in the door, and he turns on the light, and he puts the hooker on the couch, and he turns, and Philip had a line of dialogue that Sidney says, "Give me my money," and Sidney said, and Jimmy says, "Fuck you," and Sidney gave him another chance, said, "Give me my money back." And Sam says, "Fuck you," and then he shoots him. Now, I'd written that, and it's very writerly to write that, you know, and I kind of realized that the day we were there, and I said, I kind of know that this is very writerly, and the logic told me when I was writing it alone in my room that Sidney would be nice enough to give him 2 chances. Not 3 strikes, but 2 strikes. Give me my money. No. Give me my money. No. Bang, bang, bang. But then you're there on the day, and you realize outside the comfort of your own room that Sidney is not going to even ask. Sidney is going to shoot. And this isn't a movie moment of suspense, you know. There's sort of no... The suspense is the waiting. You know, the suspense isn't whether he's going to shoot him or not, you know. The suspense is he's going to fucking shoot him, you know. And it kind of fucks with the laws of suspense, which should be, is he going to shoot him or not? The suspense is, fuck, is he going to get caught? Because you know he's going to do it. Because you know Sidney really fucking well, I think, at this point. And so it's just a little twist on the laws of suspense, the sort of movie laws of suspense. I think, of course, Sidney's gonna go back to the diner where he first met John, whether it's in a sort of somewhere between sort of sadness and melancholy, you know, that kind of confused a line there. But I think that he's gonna get the fuck out of town just because he's got nothing else to be in Reno for. And it's kind of very kind of good old-fashioned get the fuck out of Dodge. You know, the cowboy always leaves town at the end of the movie. That's what happens. And so Sidney's gonna leave town, and probably logically on the way out of town is this coffee shop. I had originally taken it a couple steps further, which I don't like to admit right now. That sort of concept of the gun that shows up in the first will go off in the third, you know, is sort of taken to a kind of, you know, very theatrical sort of, taken to a sort of theatrical level here, and the where we start, we're gonna finish. You know, it's a very sort of old-fashioned, dramatic sort of approach and theatrical approach, I think. So we start in that coffee shop, we end in the coffee shop, and the blood on the cuff is I think pretty clear about what it is and how it plays, and it is very sort of literary and theatrical, and fuck, you know. You latch onto it. You find a good little kind of symbol or a little sort of visual kind of metaphor, and you just fucking run with it. Because if you get one that's good, you kind of hold on to it. You know, the cut to black happens in the middle of the move. You know, happens in the middle of the move in on his face, which sort of punctuates, sort of, you know.
The next one with good cheer.
It's good to hear the song. It's good to hear the song.
Paul's one of those writers that it's a little bit of a dream for an actor, because I wish we had the opening page of Coffee and Cigarettes, which would really be a dramatic example of what I'm talking about. In the opening scene that I play, he has it's an incredible opening speech. And it's one of those speeches, I say it's a dream for an actor because basically if you can get through it, you've won 3 Academy Awards. If you can say those words and you can find a little of his rhythmic structure in there and you can remember it, that's about all you have to do. The writing will carry you the rest of the way. And the thing with that kind of writing is to, for the actor, is to realize that he does not have to do so much. That he does have to minimalize everything. He has to really compress and take everything down, because otherwise it won't work. If you try to make something out of each moment, and Paul is famous for saying, you know, just say the words.
Do you I knew an actor once who will go unnamed, but who talked about part of his process was to write by hand out all the dialogue, and in the process of writing it out by hand would take out all the punctuation, which kind of scared the shit out of me at the time, but I was kind of new in the game, and I was like, well, okay, whatever you people do, you actor people, right. I guess that kind of makes sense to me, you know, but then, you know, as I kind of gained a little more confidence, I said, wait a minute, I put some punctuation there for a reason, and how much do you sort of riff off or really pay attention to the punctuation that, as when the script comes in, you know?
Well, if it's a if it's a movie of the week for television, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it because I know that 9 guys were up the night before until 4 o'clock in the morning, screaming and yelling about this over drinks, and it got printed at 6 o'clock, delivered to my house at 6:30, and I'm doing the set at 7, and nobody even knows what's in there. I mean, it's hard to take that kind of stuff seriously. But with a bona fide writer. I pay very careful attention to the punctuation. I tend not to pay too much attention to exclamation points and italics and things like that, but periods and commas and things like that.
Semicolons.
Semicolons. And,
Semicolons are my favorite.
A lot of writers use ... quite a bit.
I do that.
And a few dashes here and there also. Yeah,
I do a few of those. Well, there's a difference. It's a real sort of mile marker to me. Is that like no, that's a dash. That's not an ellipses. That's a dash. We must know the difference. You know.